Hi everyone. So how are you watching this lecture right now? On your desktop computer? On your laptop? Smartphone? You watching from the television in your living room? No matter how you want to consume your digital content, chances are there's a device to let you do it. The devices that we carry are powerful. They've changed our lives in both good and bad ways. We're constantly glued to them, pulling them from our pockets every few minutes to see if there's any new posts on Instagram or Facebook or TikTok. The concept of digital convergence, which is what we're talking about here, this idea that your phone will enable you to read books, watch TV, listen to music, watch movies, surf the web, record video, monitor your heart rate, get driving directions, take photos, perform music, take notes, read magazines, make phone calls, send letters. That's all of that in one device. That's digital convergence. There are a lot of reasons for digital convergence, chief of which is that digital files don't degrade. The media on which we record them does. Flash drives, hard drives, whatever drives, they have a limited lifespan. But the files themselves, when you copy them from one media source to another, are going to stay exactly the same. So whatever it is that you have recorded is going to be exactly the same as it was when you recorded it. And they're easy to reproduce. Used to be, if you wanted to make a book, you had to have printed on paper, bind it with cardboard or leather if it's something fancy. But now, if you want to create a copy of a book, it's as easy as copying a file on your laptop. Now, even though it's easy to copy and create more ebooks and whatever without any additional expense, those things still have a value. Prices aren't just set by the cost to manufacture something. It's an issue of supply and demand, what people actually want. So ebooks often wind up costing almost as much as their physical counterparts, which used to bother me a lot until I really thought about the fact that the person who created that content deserves to make money for that content that they created. Now, I'm still going to go for the best deal I possibly can get, but I don't quite begrudge spending money on digital content as much as I used to. Now, there's also a financial benefit in that we end up with a lot less wasted product sitting on store shelves, a lot more profit for the companies that produce digital content. But that does bring up another issue. When you don't need to print your content and make a physical copy of it, so you don't need machines and lots of labor, um, you, you lose a company that used to be involved in this called the publisher. The publisher was in charge of printing and creating those physical books and then distributing them to bookstores and then marketing those books. So it was their job to pretty much decide what got published. They were the gatekeepers for becoming authors. They got to decide whether you became an author or not. But if you don't need a publisher to create a physical book because you're not creating a physical book, then publishers, if they exist at all, just become big marketing companies who take a big portion of the profits just for the marketing. Now, you don't actually need to use a publisher at all. You can self-publish an ebook and distribute it through Amazon or through the iTunes bookstore. But that doesn't really mean that there is no need for publishers anymore. Ebooks need to be marketed for people to know that they're there and know that they're available to purchase. But possibilities have opened up for a lot different ways for us to get the media that we're consuming. And so we've kind of disrupted the traditional publishing industry. And similar things have happened in music, television, and the movie industries. In each case, the traditional gatekeepers for those media are now looking for other business models that, still require their existence. Our digital devices also allow us to consume all kinds of media in different ways. And by changing the ways we consume, we change the actual effect and experience of that content. The way you receive content is as much a part of the experience as the actual content itself. It's not enough to say that watching a movie on a smartphone is somehow a less impressive experience than watching it in the theater, which it totally is. It's that when you watch a movie on a smartphone, it's an entirely different thing. Now, we used to watch movies together as a community in theaters, and when we did that, we had this shared experience with our neighbors and our friends, other members of our community. Because of that, when people made movies, they had to make movies that applied to a broad audience because there weren't going to be that many choices, and they wanted to fill up the theater. So they made movies that reflected our common values. It became a way of informing and propagating those values to the next generation. As we started to have more choices, we had theaters that had more than one screen. And so, you could choose which movie you went to see. uh, the possibilities of the content opened up. And so we started to have content that went to more niche audiences. And in the 1980s, the VCR came along and changed everything again. Suddenly we began watching movies in our living room, perhaps with our family or with just, the group of our friends, but no longer as part of a larger community. We made different choices. Video rental stores began to pop up everywhere, and people made decisions and watched things based on, what they found in the video stores. Still usually a shared experience, but it wasn't the same as the larger experience in the theaters. Now we can watch movies as individuals, alone, with our tablets or our smartphones or some other device. We have an amazing array of things to select from. There's something for everybody. This means a lot of options, but not the same shared experience. We don't have to watch the same things as the other members of our family. And in many cases, that's a good thing. I don't necessarily want to watch the same content that my adult children do or that my husband does. They don't necessarily want to watch the same content that I do. So we all get to choose. We can be exposed to different ideas and to different values and make judgments based on that exposure for ourselves. You might actually find that you have more in common with like-minded people who live on the other side of the world rather than people who live on your own block or in your own house. But the cultural phenomenon of something like Star Wars can never be repeated now because we don't consume media in the same way that we did when those Star Wars movies came out. In the 1970s and 80s, there were only a few options in the theaters. And so most people went to see the same movies simply because that was what there was to see. So no matter who you were seeing the same movies. Everybody knew what the Force was. Even my mom knew what the Force was. Now, there are lots of examples of how the way we consume content is actually changing the content itself. Most people now watch TV via a DVR and or streaming services. These allow us to watch what we want when we want. They also allow us to skip commercials. So that's changed the content a lot because commercials were how television made money, still are. But advertisers, seeing less and less benefit from dollars spent on commercials and TV, start looking for other ways to spend those dollars, perhaps on the internet. This meant that television producers were getting less advertising dollars and had to find cheaper ways to produce content, which led to the phenomenon of reality TV. Did you ever wonder how that got started? It's because it's cheap. It doesn't require actors or writers. Much cheaper to produce. Still seems to get pretty good ratings. Probably because deep down people are pretty nosy and we enjoy peeking into other people's lives. We feed our own discontent by watching shows about people who are richer, better looking, or more talented than we are. Or we console ourselves and bolster our own self esteem by indulging our innate sense of Schadenfreude, which is that shameful but so human delight that we take in other people's misfortunes. So we watch shows about people suffering with addiction or mental health issues or medical problems. But maybe sometimes we take some comfort from those as we see people conquering those problems and becoming happier human beings. Anyway, traditional TV shows with writers and actors needing to find other ways to generate revenue turn to product placement, which requires the characters to use and or talk about the product as part of the storyline. Uh, Parenthetically, in the early days of television, well, not strictly speaking, an example of modern style product placement. Those television shows were specifically sponsored by products or companies, and it was announced right at the beginning of the TV show that, such and such was being brought to you by such and such product. In the case of variety shows, sometimes the cast of the show would, stop and do a commercial for the product right in the middle of the show. Uh, Now, streaming services have had to design their structure to make some accommodation for advertising. Sometimes it's built into your subscription to those streaming services. You pay a little less in order to, get a better price, but you watch some commercials for that. Or you pay more in order to not have to watch the commercials. For media like YouTube, sometimes you have to watch the ads, sometimes you get to skip part of it. But advertisers have had to scramble to keep our attention. In some cases, the commercials themselves have become media. They've become productions at the level of TV shows, sometimes to the extent that they have their own storylines. We don't really stop to think about how the way we watch has created these changes, but it absolutely has. In addition to skipping commercials, we also get to choose when we watch. It used to be that shows aired at a certain day and time throughout a scheduled season. If you missed an episode, you were out of luck until summer reruns rolled around. With the DVR, we can record shows and watch them when we have time, or simply watch through the network's streaming service whenever we feel like watching them. Now, this has led to a spoiler alert problem. We can't just assume that the people we see and talk to during the day watch the same show that we watched last night. So we want to be very careful not to ruin their enjoyment of the show by mentioning what happened in last night's episode because we don't know that they've seen it yet. So our conversations about the content that we watch have changed. Now, some people will use the DVR or streaming services to binge watch an entire season of something. Say, we didn't even know a show existed, but we heard somebody mention it and we thought, oh, hey, I'll check that out. The next thing you know, we're spending the entire weekend catching up on 3 seasons worth of a show that turned out to be pretty darn good. But this has changed the way the shows are structured. When shows were aired in a regular season, producers would use the cliffhanger ending very sparingly, if at all, because it could get a little annoying if it was used too much. You don't want your audience sitting there saying, oh my God, it's another two-parter. Now I have to wait a week to find out what happened. But we don't have to wait anymore. We can watch one episode after another. So they can use those cliffhanger endings as much as they want, and sometimes do, just to keep us watching. But one of the most transforming things that has happened because of our digital devices is that we become not just consumers of content, but creators of content. For those of us that have the creative spark, or should I say those of you that have the creative spark, there are plenty of tools out there that are cheap or even free and easy to use that allow us to express ourselves through content, whether it's video, audio, or text. Most of us are walking around with an HD video camera in our pocket or purse, often with tools already built in to help us edit that content, add special effects, add background music. We can, whenever and wherever, whenever we feel the urge, record content. That opens up another can of worms, but we'll cover that in a privacy chapter. But because it's digital content, we can easily publish what we've made through media services like YouTube. Nielsen reports that YouTube reaches more 18 to 34-year-olds than any cable network on television, and that's quite an audience. And that makes YouTube really a viable content media, not just a novelty. Millions upon millions of people are sharing their ideas with the world, and it's all out there for us to read, see, and hear. And I will see you in the next chapter. Guramahagat Agashikhanlet.